Part 1. There is something strangely enduring about the visions of Siener van Rensburg. More than a century later, people still return to them, especially when the world begins to feel uncertain. His visions were never neat predictions. They came as fragments, images, symbols, flashes of meaning that had to be interpreted. That is why they remain alive today. They are not fixed. They move with time. The red bull and the black bull. He saw two bulls locked in a violent struggle. One was red, powerful and aggressive. The other was darker, stubborn, refusing to fall. Dust rose around them as they pushed and strained, until finally the red bull weakened and collapsed. Those who lived through the Anglo-Boer War believed immediately that this was about them. The red bull was the British Empire, dressed in red coats, and the darker bull represented the Boer fighters. The meaning felt clear in hindsight, a smaller force resisting a mighty empire, not necessarily winning outright, but forcing a turning point. Many believers say this vision was fulfilled when the war ended in negotiation rather than total destruction. Scholars, however, are more cautious. They point out that the interpretation only became clear after events unfolded. Still, this remains one of the most widely accepted fulfilled visions. The death of the general. In another moment, he saw a strong figure fall suddenly. There was no long illness, no warning, just a sharp, unexpected end. The image was simple, but unsettling. This vision is almost always linked to General Coups de la Rey, who was shot at a police roadblock in 1914. His death shocked the nation. It felt senseless, abrupt, and exactly like the kind of sudden fall described in the vision. Among followers, this is considered one of the clearest fulfilled prophecies. It strengthened the belief that Siener was seeing something beyond ordinary understanding. Skeptics again argue that such a vague image could apply to many events, but the emotional weight of the match keeps the belief alive. The Blue Soldiers of Europe. He described soldiers in blue, marching across a distant land, caught in a vast and terrible conflict. The scale felt larger than anything local. This was not a small war. It was something consuming nations. Later generations connected this to the First World War, especially Germany, often symbolized by blue in his visions. The idea that a farmer in South Africa could see a European war before it fully unfolded adds to the mystery. Believers say this vision was fulfilled. Scholars again remind us that Europe was already tense at the time, and war was not unthinkable. Still, the symbolic clarity, the color, the scale, makes this one of the more convincing cases for those who trust his visions. The wagons overturn. He saw wagons tipping over, wheels broken, loads scattered across the ground. There was confusion, shouting, a sense that something stable had suddenly failed. This image is often interpreted more broadly than the earlier visions. It is said to represent the collapse of systems, governments, traditions, ways of life. Some link it to the fall of old empires after World War I. Others extend it further, seeing it in the end of apartheid and the massive political shifts that followed. This vision sits in a grey area. It is considered partially fulfilled, but also ongoing. Each generation seems to find its own overturning wagons, which is why it never quite settles into the past. What becomes clear, even in these first visions, is a pattern. The early ones are often tied to war and sudden change. They feel grounded in history, easier to point to and say, that happened. But as the visions continue, they become less concrete. The symbols grow stranger. The meanings stretch further. And that is where the real debate begins, because not everything has happened yet. Part 2. As the visions move forward, they begin to feel less like echoes of the past and more like shadows hanging over the present. The images become harder to pin down. They are less about specific people and more about atmosphere, about a country, even a world, slipping into something uncertain. The yellow water. He saw water, but it was wrong. It was not clear or life-giving. It had a yellow, sickly color, spreading slowly across the land. It did not rush like a flood. It crept, seeping into everything, leaving behind a sense of unease. Many believe this is one of the visions unfolding right now. the yellow water is often interpreted as decay, and not just physical, but moral and social. Some see it in polluted rivers and failing infrastructure. Others see it in corruption, distrust, and the slow erosion of institutions. What makes this vision powerful is its pace. It is not dramatic. It is gradual. That is why people connect it so easily to the present. Scholars tend to treat this as symbolic rather than predictive, but even they admit the imagery fits eerily well with modern anxieties. Among believers, this is firmly placed in the category of happening now. The night of fear. He described a time when darkness seemed heavier than usual. There was movement in the night, a sense of danger without clear shape. People were afraid, not because they saw everything, but because they could not. Over time, this vision has been linked, sometimes controversially, to the idea of sudden violence or widespread unrest. It is often associated with what some call a night of the long knives, though historians caution that this exact phrase may not appear in the original recordings. Even so, the feeling of the vision remains strong with fear, uncertainty, and a sense that something could break without warning. Some believe this has already appeared in moments of unrest and instability. Others insist it refers to a larger, still-coming event. Because of its vagueness, this vision sits in a tense space. It is partly seen as already experienced in smaller forms, but also feared as something that could still fully arrive. The short storm. He saw a storm that came quickly and violently. It did not last long, but while it was there, it was overwhelming. Wind, noise, confusion, then just as suddenly, it passed, leaving people to deal with what remained. This is often described as a short but intense period of crisis. Some connect it to riots or sudden outbreaks of instability. Others believe it refers to a future moment when everything feels like it is falling apart, but only for a brief time. What is interesting is how divided opinion is here. Some say this vision has already happened in smaller bursts. Others argue that the true storm has not yet arrived, and that what we have seen so far are only warnings. Scholars generally treat this as a flexible symbol, something that can be applied to many events. But among believers, there is a strong sense that its full meaning is still unfolding. The gathering clouds. In another image, he saw clouds building far beyond the horizon. They were not local. They came from different directions, slowly forming something much larger than any single storm. This vision is usually interpreted as global tension, nations moving toward conflict. In modern discussions, it is often linked to the idea of a future world war or large-scale international crisis. Unlike the earlier visions tied to past wars, this one is usually placed in the future. People point to rising tensions across the world and say, this is how it begins. The clouds are not yet the storm, but they are a warning that something bigger is forming. Scholars tend to be skeptical of linking this directly to any specific future war. But they acknowledge that the imagery, slow, inevitable build-up, is a powerful way of describing geopolitical tension. By this point, the tone of the visions has clearly shifted. The earlier ones could be anchored in history. These cannot. They live in the present, or just ahead of it, where interpretation becomes more personal, more emotional. Some people see confirmation everywhere. Others see coincidence and projection. But almost everyone agrees on one thing: the visions become more intense from here. Because what comes next is not just about chaos. It is about what comes after it. Part 3. As the visions move toward their final images, something changes again. The fear and confusion do not disappear, but they are no longer the end of the story. Instead, there is a sense, quiet but persistent, that something follows the chaos. Not a return to the old world, but the emergence of something new. The third force. He saw a situation where two sides stood in opposition, locked in tension, unable to resolve anything. Then, unexpectedly, a third presence appeared. It was not part of either side, yet it carried influence, almost as if it had been waiting for the right moment. This vision has been interpreted in many ways. Politically, some believe it refers to a new movement or leadership that rises when existing systems fail. Others see it as something less literal, a shift in power, or even a spiritual awakening that changes how people think and act. What makes this vision compelling is its timing. It does not appear at the beginning of conflict, but after things have already begun to break down. It suggests that resolution will not come from the forces already in play, but from something unexpected. Among believers, this is often seen as still to come, or only just beginning to take shape. Scholars tend to treat it as symbolic of historical cycles, where new powers emerge after periods of instability. Either way, it carries a sense of cautious hope. The divided land. He described a land that no longer felt whole. People were separated, not always by visible borders, but by deeper divisions. There was tension in everyday life, a sense that unity had been lost. This vision is often connected to social fragmentation. Some link it to political divisions, others to cultural and economic gaps that continue to widen. Unlike earlier visions tied to single events, this one feels ongoing, almost like a condition rather than a moment. Many believe this is already happening. The divisions may not look exactly as imagined, but the feeling is familiar. Scholars agree that this kind of imagery reflects real societal pressures, though they caution against reading it as a fixed prophecy. Still, the idea of a divided land resonates strongly. It feels less like a prediction and more like a mirror. The blue stone. Then comes one of the most mysterious images of all. He saw a large stone, blue in color, standing out clearly against everything around it. It was solid, unmoving, almost out of place in a world that seemed unstable. No single interpretation has ever settled around this vision. Some believe the blue stone represents a foundation, a point of stability after chaos. Others see it as a symbol of identity, something a nation returns to when everything else has shifted. There are also interpretations that link the color blue to outside influence, suggesting that the future may be shaped not only from within, but also by forces beyond the country's borders. But just as many reject that idea, insisting the stone is something deeply local, even spiritual. What almost everyone agrees on is its timing. The blue stone does not appear during the chaos. It appears after. It stands as a turning point. Because of that, this vision is widely seen as still to come. It carries a sense of resolution, but not in a simple or comforting way. It suggests rebuilding, but on different ground than before. The quiet after. In the final images, there is less movement. The noise fades. What remains is quieter, almost uncertain, as if the world is catching its breath after everything that has happened. There is no clear picture of triumph or defeat. Instead, there is a feeling of survival. Of people standing in a changed landscape, trying to understand what comes next. Some interpret this as renewal. Others see it as a warning that the future will not return to what was lost. Scholars often point out that this kind of ending is typical of symbolic visions. It leaves space for interpretation, rather than closing the story. When all the visions are considered together, a pattern becomes difficult to ignore. The earlier ones seem rooted in history and are often described as fulfilled. The middle visions reflect instability and are widely seen as happening now. The final visions, like the third force and the blue stone, belong mostly to the future, or at least to a future that is still forming. What makes the blue stone especially powerful is its role in this sequence. It is not just another symbol. It feels like an anchor. After conflict, division, and fear, it represents something that holds. For some, that means hope. For others, it raises more questions than answers. And perhaps that is why these visions have never faded. They do not tell people exactly what will happen. They offer images, strong, strange, and open-ended, and leave each generation to decide where they stand inside them. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for watching.